Okay, welcome to Facebook Live. I'm Fran Heathcote, the Deputy President of PCS, and over the next 30 minutes I'm going to be talking to our General Secretary, Mark Sawatka, about our pay campaign. Mark's going to be taking questions on the pay campaign and reporting back from his recent meetings with the Cabinet Office and his demand that the pay remit be withdrawn. I'm standing in for Janice Godrich tonight, our President, as she's out on the road doing pay meetings. I'm going to start by asking Mark a bit about the campaign, some questions that we've received in advance, and then we'll take any live questions that we receive on Facebook. Before we start, though, I'd like to thank everybody, all the PCS reps and members who have got involved in our campaign. We're about halfway through the halfway stage of the ballot now, and the level of activity across PCS has been absolutely unprecedented. So a massive thank you to everybody who's been involved. It really does show the strength of feeling about a decade-long pay squeeze and how important it is that we win the ballot and smash the threshold. So, Can I start by asking those watching on Facebook to share the event and keep submitting your questions, and we will try and take as many of them as we can. So good evening, Mark, and by way of introduction, can you tell us why PCS is balloting for industrial action over pay?
Good evening, Fran, and good evening to everybody, and thanks ever so much for tuning in. We're balloting for industrial action over pay because after 11 years of pay cuts in real terms, we have to say to the government enough is enough, that pay offers that are less than the rate of inflation means a cut in real terms for our members and their families. We've submitted a very reasonable pay claim for 5%, and we believe our members are worth 5%. The government, despite telling us last year there would be no pay cap applied to the civil service, are trying to get away this year with a further pay remit of 1 to 1.5%. So our vote for industrial action is our way of saying we're not prepared to put up with it, and the government need to negotiate with us on behalf of their hard-working staff. And that's why it's important that everybody votes yes in our ballot and the government treat us fairly.
Okay, so can you tell us more about the pay deals that other public sector workers are getting, including, of course, our own PCS members in the Scottish administration?
Yeah, I think it's an important question because all public sector workers have been suffering from pay restraint now for many, many years. And there was a pay cap in place of 1%, and before that, a complete pay freeze. And after the general election, where Theresa May lost her majority and said she was listening to the just managing and the hard-working men and women in this country, the government told us that they would lift the pay cap. And that's why we expected this year to have a proper negotiation about pay. Following the government saying that, we've seen pay increases in other parts of the public sector that are far better than what they want their own staff to receive. So in the health service, for example, unions and members have voted to accept pay rises of 6.5% over 3 years. In local government, there is a minimum pay increase of 2% a year for the next 2 years, but much, much higher rates of pay than that for the lowest paid. And as you've said, in Scotland, the Scottish Government has negotiated with PCS pay rises that are above the rate of inflation for all of our members, and for many of them we are seeing pay rises of between 4 and 12%. So if our members in Scotland are getting that from the Scottish Government, if health workers and local government workers are getting it, to tell us that we're going to get 1 to 1.5% is an insult, and we cannot accept it.
You also met with the Cabinet Office Minister last week. What did you say to him?
Well, it was a very interesting meeting. We met David Lidington, who is effectively the Deputy Prime Minister, and he was also there with the Minister for the Civil Service, Oliver Dowden, and was there with Treasury and Cabinet Office officials. And in a really good move, I didn't just go on behalf of PCS members, but I went with the General Secretaries of FDA and Prospect. And all three of us had a united message, and that was the government's treatment of its own staff is deplorable. To expect people to have another year of a pay cut and less than everybody else is completely unacceptable. But not only is the pay offer that they're making unacceptable, the way they've done it really has plumbed new depths. They promised us consultation. They promised us that they would not issue their pay remit guidance until there'd been further meetings with the unions. And then in a breathtaking break of that promise, they issued the pay remit and didn't even tell us. I mean, members will be amazed to know that we actually found the pay remit guidance on DODS, on the internet. The government didn't even tell the unions that he was issuing the pay remit. So we told Mr Lidington that that was deplorable treatment and asked him to reconsider. Now, interestingly enough, he said he would go away and write back to us within 48 hours because he wanted to reflect on the points that we had made. And I can tell people tonight that he has not written to us after 48 hours. It's another broken promise. And so this afternoon I wrote to him again, reminding him that he should withdraw the pay remit guidance and have proper negotiations on behalf of all our members and his hard-working staff.
Okay, thank you. And actually the question we've received was about unity with the other civil service unions, so that ties in very well. On the subject, Dan, who's the branch secretary of the HMRC HQ London branch, asked this question. Given that it appears that the PCS, FDA and Prospect have a united position on the recently published Treasury pay remit guidance, it would be helpful if the three unions were to issue a joint statement on pay that can be disseminated to members. Is that possible?
Well, that's a really great question, and I think it reflects something that we all know, that our members look to PCS to stand up for them, but they know that all of these things are better if all the civil service unions can act together. And it was a good thing last week that Prospect, the FDA and PCS had one united message, and I have to say the government were clearly shocked by it because they'd probably been briefed the fact that the unions don't work in harmony and we would have a different opinion, so it was quite powerful. Now, I can say, Dan, that this afternoon I have agreed to sign a joint letter with Mike Clancy from Prospect and Dave Penman from the FDA. That letter's got to Liz Truss, who is the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and we have demanded a joint meeting with her for her to negotiate properly on the pay remit guidance and for her to explain why, at the moment, she wants to treat our staff so badly and to get her to reconsider. And I would hope that following that meeting it will be possible for the unions to jointly issue some communication, and I will be talking to the leaders of Prospect and the FDA in the coming days and weeks as to how this unity that we showed the government last week can be maintained. And obviously it follows that if we vote in big numbers in our industrial action ballot with a yes vote, that one of the first things we will do is not just go back to the government, but we will want to sit down with our colleagues in other unions to ensure that we can jointly keep up the momentum on the government.
Okay, thanks Mark, and hopefully Dan, that answers your question. The next question is from Ian Gray in the HMPS, who asked, for many years the PCS's campaign for a significant pay rise, entirely justified, to the employer, in his case HMPPS. For as long as I can remember, the employer has simply steamrolled and imposed a derisory pay increase, which it sees fit. Why does Mark Sawatka believe it will be any different this time?
Well, that's a hard-hitting question, and I'm glad it's been asked, because I know lots of members will be thinking that. You know, we're asking them to vote in a ballot, and a lot of people will be thinking it's been tough for the last 10 years. Why will this year be any different? And I think there's a number of reasons why it's different. I mean, the first thing to say is this is undoubtedly the weakest government that we've had to negotiate with. They don't just teeter from week to week with a crisis. It seems it's almost hour to hour. They're in disarray. There's talks of splits. They've lost their majority in the general election, and they've already had to treat other public sector workers differently. So I think the first thing to say is that is different. The second thing is that having paid other public sector workers, deservedly so, more money, the government now stands accused of treating its own people worse than anyone else. And I think that's a very powerful narrative that we can motivate people to say that we're not prepared to accept that. And I think the third thing is because we have such broad support, so for example, lots of MPs are supporting us in Parliament. We know that the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, and John McDonnell, his Shadow Chancellor, have publicly supported us. We know that Chris Stevens, the chair of our parliamentary group, has had an adjournment debate in Parliament. So we've got real political support to also, I think, give our members a real sense that we're not on our own, that most people who have any sense of justice recognise that this cannot be allowed to stand. So I think for all of those reasons, plus the fact that there's a unity across the union now, a sense of purpose, more activity than we've ever seen before, leads me to be absolutely confident that if we can beat the threshold, the 50% turnout that the law now requires, we're in the strongest position to try and get pay justice than we have been in for a long, long time. And I hope all of our members will embrace that, vote in the ballot, to ensure that we can make this the year that we get some justice on pay.
Okay, thank you. Now one close to my own heart. In relation to pay in the DWP, Chris Humble from the DWP asked, realistically, how can anybody who opted into the employee deal be expected to strike? And secondly, If people are struggling to cope with the cost of living due to minimal pay rises, how can the union possibly expect anyone to come out on strike and lose further money?
Well, again, I'm really glad that this question has been asked, and let me encourage anyone who has any questions or any doubts, they can not just send questions in now, but go to your local rep, ring up PCS headquarters. Don't sit there and wonder what the answer to these questions are. Ask the questions, because it's only that way that we can hope to persuade you to vote yes in the ballot. On the employee deal, the thing that I would say about that is that the employee deal was done between PCS and the DWP management at a time there was a rigid 1% cap in place, when all public sector workers were having the cap applied, and it was a deal done at that time for the union to try and generate more money for people by agreeing to certain changes. Now, that was then. Where we are now is we have submitted a claim that seeks to get the government to give 5% extra funding across the board so that every member of PCS benefits. And the simple way I'd explain that is that any money people had under the employee deal was negotiated in those circumstances, and people had to give up and make certain changes to get the money. This is trying to get you, on top of that, the 5% funding to whether you opted in or you opted out. And I think that's the key message. We all benefit because we're trying to get 5% today. Whatever has gone before was then, this is now, and it is about extra money. On the question about low paid people, I mean, that is a very, very good question, because it's a vicious circle, isn't it? That people are low paid. If because we're low paid, people don't think they can afford to do anything, the low pay will continue and the vicious circle will be never ending. And there comes a point where we all have to decide that we are going to stand up and try to break that vicious circle and say low pay must end. It is the just thing to do. It is the right thing to do. And put simply, it's what people deserve. Whether that's in DWP or anywhere else, people work very, very hard in very difficult circumstances with not enough staff, with changes going on around them. The least they should expect is better pay. And so my answer to the question really is, first of all, nobody will lose any pay by voting yes in this ballot, because what we want is a massive mandate to not call a strike in the first instance, but to go back to the Treasury and say to them, now our members have spoken, we expect them to sit down and negotiate with us. And I can't overstate this point, because the government's clearly calculating that we cannot get over the 50% threshold. They believe we can't do anything. So the very act of voting gives us a stronger hand in the negotiations. But I repeat the point that as we're balloting now, and as we hope for further negotiations, we're also consulting with people like yourself, Fran, around the union, the people who are elected in every group, representing members wherever they work in the civil service, and we're consulting on not just asking low-paid people to lose money through strikes, but for what is the most effective form of action we can take that has the hardest hitting effect on the government, that means they cannot ignore us. So the answer to the question really is, give us the mandate to get us in a stronger position in the talks, and we will construct an industrial action strategy that is designed to put the most pressure on government, but asking for the least sacrifice that we can for those who are on the lowest paid. And if we get that right, that is a message that Theresa May will not be able to ignore. So vote yes in the first instance to make the pressure on the government.
Thanks. What message does Mark have for members who are about to be made redundant, and why should they vote? And that question comes to me and now there.
Well, obviously I don't know the circumstances, and clearly if anyone's been made redundant against their wishes, then obviously I'm very sad to hear that, and I hope that the message, first of all, we can give to the union is that we oppose closures and we're opposing cuts, and we are trying to pressure the government to put more resources into the civil service. But my message, I think, to Ian would be that at the time that we're urging people to vote yes on the pay ballot, people should know that we are also in very important consultations with the government about the cuts they want to make in people's redundancy scheme. And a lot of people at the moment who are considering leaving the civil service will be worried about whether they're going to get less redundancy and less pension entitlement than they should get. And therefore, for my message to all of our members is, whether they're thinking of leaving at the moment, whether they may have an office closure, or whether they are staying, is if we win on the question of pay and send a strong message to the government, it's not just about pay. It is also being in a strong position to ensure anyone leaving gets the maximum possible redundancy terms, and anyone who's facing a campaign to keep their office open or to save their job will do so knowing the union is stronger because we have shown the government that we're united on pay. So it's one of those things here that the more we stand up to the government on pay, the more they'll have to take the union seriously, whether it's about closures, redundancy terms or anything else. So we all benefit if the government recognises that the union is one that they have to negotiate properly with, and that's what's at stake in this ballot.
Okay, thank you. Another question from the DWP from Caroline Greenwood. What about those people who are unable to commit to the employee deal? What will PCS do for them?
So this means people who haven't opted...
The people who've opted out.
Opted out?
Yeah.
So again, I would make the point that obviously those who opted out have had the lowest increases, I think 0.25%. And obviously what we would say to those people is, if you think about it, that we get the 5% funding that we're seeking to get. That will either mean that in national negotiations we would hope that everybody is getting a 5% increase, or if the government won't have national negotiations but do agree to give extra funding to the department, it means that people like Fran and our negotiators in the DWP will sit down with the management and tell them that the extra money that we forced out of the Treasury must now be negotiated with the union for distribution to all of our members. And our pledge is, whether you opted into the employee deal or you opted out, extra funding that we get from the Treasury as a successful result of this campaign should benefit all of our members in all departments, regardless of whether they've opted in or opted out in DWP, for example. So if we get extra money, the simple proposition is everybody benefits.
Okay. Next one's a question from Janet Wilkowski. Can something be done to bridge the gap for those who will never reach the max of their grade?
Well, again, and I know this question came up last time, that in this period of austerity, we know that the government has sought to remove pay progression. It hasn't put the funding into government departments. It's meant that the derisory amounts of money that we have had to be spread across a whole series of issues, such as the national minimum wage, the living wage, people who are suffering as a result of the removal of progression. And again, what we say to people here is that when there is no money available, solving these problems is next to impossible. If we reach a position where the government is forced to put extra funding into civil service pay, it allows us as a union to negotiate with extra resource to solve a whole range of problems. And whether that means that people should be getting contractual pay progression back. And in Scotland, it's important to say that the Scottish Government pay offer did not just give, for example, a 3% consolidated pay rise. In addition to that, people got pay progression, or if they're on the max, they got an additional 1% non-consolidated pay. So that example shows us that with extra money, there's a whole series of problems that we can fix. And we are determined to do that, because it is very annoying when politicians go on the TV and claim nobody gets 1% because everybody gets pay progression, when they actually know in the civil service that that is a lie. And I think therefore it's important that members who are either on the max, believe they'll never get there, understand that with more money we can solve an awful lot of the grievances that exist.
Okay, thanks Mark. Okay, this one's from Shane Harris. Why are the majority of staff either non-members, or if they are members, apathetic? It's a good question.
That is a good question, and I don't know what department this question came from. And so the first thing I would say is that there are quite a number of departments where the majority of staff are PCS members. And therefore, so the basic premise of the question in terms of membership isn't true. Although there are some government departments, it's not as high as we would like it to be. There's a variety of reasons. Most people, when research is done, say they're not in a union because nobody ever asked them to join. We know that the government targeted our union in a very vicious campaign to take away time from our representatives to go around and speak to people, to urge them to join, to withdrawing the ability for people to pay union dues through their pay packet. And the government has been very hostile. And so that explains, I think, why membership is not as high everywhere as we'd like it to be. But the basic premise is, in the big government departments, we do have a majority. The apathetic question, and that is a really interesting one, because of course the government's laws, by forcing us to have more than 50% of people vote in, actually at their heart have an assumption that many people are apathetic and they can't be bothered to vote in ballots, and therefore we'll never be able to strike. And we've got a chance to show everyone that people are not apathetic, that actually they will be prepared to vote in the ballot and participate. And let's be clear here that we want people to vote yes, but we want people to vote. And even if you feel strongly that you don't agree with what we're doing, we urge you to vote no then in the ballot, because what we don't want is people sitting at home and not playing their part. It's your union. We want you to cast a vote. Hopefully a vote yes, but whatever you do, to make sure that you return your vote. Where people think there's apathy, what I would say is if you think that's in your office, then why not contact the union and invite the speaker down? I can say that we would be more than happy where we can to bring people down, hold meetings, talk to people. Sometimes if people see the union hold a meeting, they very quickly realise that we're there to help them out, and the more people who attend the meetings, the more it sends a message to the local management and the national management. So we're challenging this notion that there's a lot of apathy around there, because if we break the threshold, we will have demonstrated to everyone that PCS members mean business, and our chance now is to do something about it. And I repeat the point that if you're watching this tonight and in your office not much has happened, you haven't seen a union rep, don't wait for something to happen. Pick up the phone, ring your local PCS office, or email us, or send us a tweet or a Facebook message, and we will get down there if we can and arrange to do something about it.
Okay, will we have an indication of how many people have voted halfway through the ballot? That's from Suzanne Grice.
Okay, so I'm very happy to take that question on. The first thing to say is that these laws and this ballot is independently scrutinised, and so we do not know how many people are voting because it's an independent ballot, and I think it's important that we say that. But people will know that because of the importance of the threshold, we're doing everything we can to try and get people to tell us that they voted. And so every PCS member, and I repeat the point, that you haven't voted till you've posted, that we want you to post your ballot back, and then we want you to go on our website, and we want you to press the button to tell us that you voted. I can confirm that from tomorrow, if we've got your phone number, you'll get a recorded message from me tomorrow that will say, if you voted, press 1. And all of that information is not because we're being nosy, it's because it's only by knowing how many people have voted can we work out whether or not we're likely to beat the threshold. And it's a way of trying to engage with people. And I can also confirm that we're doing phone banking, where we've got teams of volunteers now ringing people. So tonight I can reveal that we already know that 20,000 members have told us that they have voted. Now that's good, because 20,000 is a lot, but it's only a third of what we need. And so there's an indication to the question. 20,000 people today have told us that they voted. Tomorrow, all our branch secretaries will either be able to online access, or they can access by contacting their PCS office, a list of who in their branch has told us they voted, which means that we can then have local information that branch secretaries will know who to go and chase up, for example. So all of this is an essential tool to allow us to keep persuading people to vote. I hope that the 20,000 who've told us is less than the people who have actually voted, but I will remind people here that if you voted, do tell us, where the most important thing to do is to cast your vote. So we know that we're 20,000 down, we've got another 40,000 plus to go, and if you haven't voted yet, please do so, and please tell us that you voted.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Here's a good question. I've voted yes already. What can I do to help PCS?
Well, first of all, thank you for voting, and thank you for voting yes. So what you can do is, if you have voted, it means that you obviously agree with us that this is the most important ballot that we've had, and that sending a message to the government is critical. So now that you've done that yourself, what I would ask is that you do everything possible now to urge your colleagues to do the same, to go to anyone in your office who's a PCS rep and offer any assistance that you may be able to give us. That could mean volunteering to do some phone banking. It could mean leafleting outside your office. It could mean literally just asking the people who work on your section or at the vending machine or in the canteen, I voted today, have you voted in the ballot? One of the really essential things, I think, by having conversations is that we're finding when we're doing phone banking, a lot of people are telling us they support us, but they haven't voted yet. They can't remember what they've done with their ballot paper. They moved and they forgot to tell us. And they're asking, what can they do about it? So if you meet anyone like that, tell them to immediately email us or ring us to get a replacement ballot paper. Because it would be a real unfortunate thing, wouldn't it, if lots of people supported us, they lost their ballot paper, they didn't get another one, and that wasn't translated into a vote. So all things that you can do are helpful, from spending a minute or two to being able to dedicate some time on a regular basis over the next few weeks. Every single vote matters here. And so whether it's talking to your colleagues, whether it's volunteering to do some leafleting, every little helps. So thank you for voting yes. Now hopefully you can urge as many of your colleagues in your workplace to follow your example.
Okay, not sure you'll answer this. How much should I contribute to the Fighting Fund? Gary?
Okay, so what I would say, Gary, is again, every little helps. I mean, we've put out a general call asking people if they were prepared to give us sort of £2 as a voluntary contribution. If people can afford to give more than that, or even if they can only afford to give £1, every single contribution will go into a fund to allow us to pay strike pay to people that we ask to come out on any targeted action that the NEC approves. And therefore we are going to make a big push now on raising money, and part of that we may well come out in a further consultation asking members about ways that we can try and boost our Fighting Fund substantially. And so give as much as you can, but rest assured for all members our commitment is this: if you give us money in the Fighting Fund donation, if you now give us more than you were planning because we're having a strike ballot, our guarantee is every penny given will not be spirited away into some budget somewhere or other and be put in the bank. Every penny given will be used to support PCS members who we ask to come out on strike on everybody's behalf to get the government to sit up and treat us fairly on pay. So give whatever you can afford, but most importantly, more people you can encourage to give us £1 or £2, then that means we're all contributing. The more money we raise, the more pressure we can put on the government.
Okay, thank you. And another question from Ian. When the lowest paid are given a pay rise due to the rise in the national minimum wage, how can we use that message to force the government into taking the 5% pay claim seriously?
Well, what a question, because what it highlights here is that, you know, the story I sometimes tell when I do meetings about when I started in the civil service on my first day, and my mother told me how proud she was because I'd have a really well-paid job and a great pension and a job for life. And now that seems like a really bad joke, doesn't it? And the fact that our government's own staff are on the national minimum wage, or departments have to take emergency measures to give them the national living wage, tells us a story. The government rely on our members to deliver a whole range of public services, and yet they pay them appallingly low wages. That cannot be allowed to stand. We represent some of the lowest paid people in the public sector in the UK. The government want that to continue. We have asked them, we have taken them personal testimonies, independent research. We have made the most compelling case. Yet they sit here and they still say no. And I believe they will continue to say no until they realise that we're not going to put up with it anymore. And the single most important thing that people can do to show them that we're not going to put up with it is to put an X in your ballot paper, vote yes, and send it back. And that, I think, can knock the government from its complacency and give us a real chance of dealing with the blight of low pay, but also the fact that those people who perhaps aren't on the lowest wages but still have pay cuts every year, finally allow them to look at their family and say, do you know what, maybe this year we've got a bit more than we've had to. Maybe we can do those things that we've missed but we can't afford.
Okay, final questions then, Mark. How do you think the ballot's going?
Okay, so as I said earlier, we cannot know with certainty because it's an independent ballot. But I think there's lots of reasons to be optimistic, but there's also a message here that says we cannot be complacent. So how it's going? On the one level, we have seen unprecedented amounts of activity in the union. I mean, I want to thank people in the way you did when you started, Fran. The amount of work people are doing, whether it's leafleting, phone banking, standing outside the gate with lists asking people who have voted, people writing to their MPs, attending meetings, you know, it's so inspirational. It's our union at its best, and there is more activity going on over this ballot, I think, than we have seen for a decade or more. So that's a really good sign. I've already mentioned that 20,000 people have already told us that they voted, and that's a good sign, although we need to go a lot further. My note of caution is the phone banking tells us also another story. Huge levels of support, but lots of members telling us they haven't voted yet and that they've lost their ballot paper or they've never received a ballot paper. So my message here is that I have no doubt people support what we're doing. They know that we have a just claim. They want to force the government to do something different. But the difficulties of postal balloting and all that entails, the fact that we've never got over 50% before, means not only can we not be complacent, but we should make every hour count. And so I believe we can, and I believe we will beat the threshold, but it is going to be hard work, and we've all got to ensure that the message we get across is not just to vote, but to ask people whether they voted, and if they haven't, urge them to do so, and if they need a new ballot paper, to request a new ballot paper, because nothing would be worse than having a huge vote saying we want to take action and finding we are just below the legal mandate, which means that we will have no leverage on the government. Imagine on the 23rd of July how people will feel if we've broken the threshold with a yes vote. It gives us everything to believe that we can challenge this government. If on the other hand we've fallen just short, then that's clearly going to be a very sobering moment for us all. The best way to ensure that we're in a strong position is leave no stone unturned and turn all this activity into deeds. And I'll leave you with the slogan: you haven't voted until you've posted, and no matter how good your intentions, until you've put your ballot paper in the letterbox, then your intentions will not result in pressure on the government. Only voting will put pressure on the government.
Okay, so with just over 2 weeks to go until the ballot closes, please do everything you can to encourage all your colleagues, all your workmates, everybody you sit with and sit near, to make sure they've posted their ballot paper, not just filled it in, but posted it. And let's make sure that on the 23rd of July, we've got a result that we can really celebrate. Thank you very much.